I always thought I had a good relationship with my son. I helped him with his down payment. I watched his kids every weekend. But last Tuesday, I stopped by his house to drop off some groceries. The front door was cracked open, and I heard laughter from the kitchen. Then I heard my son's voice. He wasn't laughing. He told his wife, "I just can't do it anymore. She's finally become a burden, and we need to figure out which facility will take her." The groceries felt like lead in my hands. I didn't go in. I just turned around and walked back to my car, realizing that my own son was counting down the days until I was out of his sight. My own son, the boy I stayed up with for 3 nights straight when he had the croup, the man whose college tuition I paid for by working 2 jobs after his father passed. To him, I wasn't a mother anymore, a weight to be managed, a problem to be solved. When David was born, he was so small. The doctors were worried, and I spent weeks in that hospital chair, barely sleeping, just watching his chest rise and fall. I promised God that if He let my boy grow strong, I would spend the rest of my life making sure he never wanted for anything. I kept that promise. After my husband Arthur passed away 15 years ago, I poured everything I had into David. He was my world. When he met Sarah, I was so happy for him. I remember telling her at their wedding, "Take care of my boy, and I'll take care of the rest." And I did. When they bought that house, the big one with the wraparound porch, they didn't have enough for the down payment. I didn't even hesitate. I sold the small cottage Arthur and I had lived in for 30 years. I moved into a tiny apartment across town just so I could give them that money. "Mom, you're a lifesaver," David had told me then. He hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. He told me that I would always have a place with them. He said that guest room was Grandma's room. For the first few years it was wonderful. I was there every day. I picked the grandkids up from school. I made the Sunday roasts. I was the one who knew where the extra light bulbs were kept and how to get the grass stains out of the soccer uniforms. I felt useful. I felt like the foundation of their lives. I remember one afternoon, about 4 years ago, the youngest, Leo, had a fever. David and Sarah both had big meetings. I sat in that rocking chair in the nursery for 6 hours, singing the old songs my own mother taught me. David came home, saw us both asleep, and kissed my forehead. He whispered, "I don't know what we'd do without you, Mom." That whisper, I lived on those words for years. I thought they meant I was loved. I thought they meant I had a home for as long as my heart was beating. I didn't realize that in their eyes my usefulness had an expiration date. Slowly the lifesaver became the visitor. Then the visitor became the guest, and finally, as I heard through that door, the guest became the burden. I sat in my car that day, looking at the house I helped buy. and I realized I was looking at a fortress I was no longer allowed to enter. I started the engine and drove back to my quiet, empty apartment. The silence there used to feel peaceful. Now it just felt like the truth. It didn't happen overnight. Looking back, I see the breadcrumbs now. A betrayal like this, it's a slow leak before the roof finally caves in. It's the way the air in the room changes when you walk in. It started with the suggestions. Sarah would say, "Mom, you don't need to drive in this traffic. Why don't you stay home this weekend?" It sounded like care. It tasted like honey, but it was the beginning of the wall they were building. Soon the guest room, my room, started changing. My books were moved to the top shelf. Then they were moved to a box in the garage to make room for Sarah's new home office equipment. I remember standing in that room, looking at the empty space where my sewing machine used to sit. "We just need the space for a few months, Mom," David had said, not looking me in the eye. "You understand, don't you?" I nodded. I always nodded. I didn't want to be the difficult mother-in-law. I wanted to be the easy one, the one who didn't take up any space. I started making myself smaller and smaller, hoping that if I was quiet enough, they wouldn't notice I was there. Then came the comments, small things that felt like paper cuts. I'd offer to help with the dishes, and Sarah would say, "No, Mom, you always leave a film on the glasses. Just sit down." Or I'd tell a story about David when he was little, and he'd roll his eyes at the table. "We've heard this 100 times, Mom. Can we talk about something else?" The worst part wasn't the children, it was the grandchildren. Children are like mirrors. They reflect what they see at home. Little Leo, the one I used to rock to sleep, started looking at me like a stranger. One day I tried to hug him, and he pulled away. He said, "Mommy says your house smells like old people, and we shouldn't stay there too long." I felt the blood drain from my face. I looked at Sarah, who was standing by the fridge. She didn't correct him. She just brushed her hair back and said, "Leo, don't be rude." But she was smiling. It was a cold, satisfied smile. The calls stopped being about "how are you" and started being about "what do you need?" Every time I rang David, his first words were, "Everything okay, Mom? Is there an emergency?" As if the only reason I'd ever call him was because I was falling apart. He didn't want my company. He wanted to make sure I wasn't going to cost him any time or money. I spent my nights in my apartment staring at the phone, waiting for a text that never came. I started realizing that I was the one doing all the heavy lifting in our relationship. I was the one driving over. I was the one bringing the food. I was the one asking the questions. If I stopped moving towards them, would they even notice I was gone? The breaking point came 3 months ago. It was my 75th birthday. I didn't expect a parade. I didn't even expect a big party. I just wanted a dinner, a quiet meal with my son, my daughter-in-law, and my grandkids. I had mentioned it to David weeks before. He told me, "Of course, Mom, we'll do something special." On the morning of my birthday, I woke up early. I went to the salon and had my hair set. I bought a new blouse, a soft lavender color that Arthur used to love. I sat by my phone waiting for the call to tell me what time they'd be picking me up. Noon passed, 3 o'clock passed. By 6 o'clock, my heart was hammering in my chest. I thought maybe there had been an accident. Maybe something was wrong. I called David. It went straight to voicemail. I called Sarah. No answer. Finally, I did something I'm not proud of. I drove over there. I told myself I was just checking in. When I pulled up to the curb, the house was glowing. Every light was on. There were cars lined up in the driveway, Sarah's parents' car, their friends from the country club. I could hear music through the walls. I could hear laughter. I walked up to the window, the big picture window in the dining room, and there they were, a full table. There was a cake in the center, but it wasn't for me. It was a celebration for Sarah's promotion. They were all raising glasses of champagne. I saw David stand up to give a toast. He looked so happy. He looked light. And then I saw the empty chair. There was one empty chair at the end of the table. For a second, I thought it was for me. But then Sarah's mother sat in it. I stood in the dark, in the rain, wearing my lavender blouse, and realized that I hadn't been forgotten. I had been excluded. This wasn't an accident. This was a choice. I walked up to the front door and knocked. Not a soft knock, but a firm one. The kind of knock my father used to give when he meant business. The door opened. It was David. He had a glass of wine in his hand and a party hat tilted on his head. When he saw me, his face didn't go soft with guilt. It went hard with annoyance. "Mom, what are you doing here?" he asked. "Not happy birthday, not come in." "It's my birthday, David," I said. My voice was trembling, but I kept my eyes on his. He didn't even look ashamed. He just sighed. "Mom, we told you we were busy tonight. We were going to call you tomorrow. Sarah's had a big week, and we just wanted a night with, the inner circle." The inner circle? After 75 years on this earth and 45 years of giving him everything I owned, I was no longer in the inner circle? "I'm a burden, aren't I?" I asked. I didn't mean to say it, but the words just spilled out. David leaned against the doorframe. He looked over his shoulder at the party, then back at me. He didn't lower his voice. "If you're going to be dramatic, Mom, then yes. This showing up uninvited, this is exactly what we're talking about. You're becoming a lot to handle. We're trying to live our lives, and you're always just there, waiting." He started to close the door. "Go home, Mom. We'll call you when things settle down." The click of that lock was the loudest sound I've ever heard. It was the sound of a son giving up on his mother. I stood on that porch, the rain finally soaking through my coat, and I realized that the burden was officially being put down. I drove home that night in a daze. The windshield wipers were rhythmic. Burden, burden, burden. When I got back to my apartment, I didn't cry. I think I was beyond tears. I sat in the dark and looked at the lavender blouse I had bought for a dinner that never happened. For weeks I did exactly what David asked. I stopped waiting. I didn't call, I didn't text, I didn't drive by. It's funny how people who call you a burden react when you actually stop carrying the weight. They expect you to crawl back, to apologize for being in the way. They didn't expect me to disappear. But I wasn't just sitting there. You see, when I sold my house to give David that down payment, I didn't give him everything. I kept a small piece of land in the valley, land that Arthur had bought for pennies decades ago. I had also kept the life insurance policy Arthur left specifically for me, which I had been saving to leave to David one day. I realized that night on the porch, why was I saving for a man who couldn't wait for me to be gone? I called a realtor. I sold that land to a developer who had been pestering me for years. Then I did something David never expected. I didn't move into a facility. I moved into a luxury retirement boutique 3 hours away, near the coast. It has a library, a garden, and most importantly, it has a gate. The twist came about a month ago. David's business took a turn. I knew it would. He always was better at spending money than making it. He called me, his voice shaking. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't apologize for my birthday. "Mom," he said, "the house. We're behind on the mortgage. I remember you saying you had that land in the valley. We need to sell it to save the house. It's for the grandkids, Mom. You don't want them to lose their home, do you?" I felt a coldness in my chest, but it wasn't the cold of the rain. It was the cold of a woman who had finally found her spine. "The land is gone, David," I told him. The silence was long. "What do you mean, gone? Did you give it to a charity? Mom, how could you be so selfish?" "I sold it," I said quietly, "and I used the money to pay for my new life. You told me I was a burden, David, and a burden is something you have to carry. I decided to carry myself. I've paid for my own care for the next 20 years. You don't ever have to worry about me again." He started to yell, but I didn't listen. I simply hung up. I realized that the inner circle he was so proud of was built on my foundation, and I had just taken my bricks back. People ask me if I'm lonely. Sometimes, in the quiet moments before sleep, I miss the little boy who used to scrape his knees and run to me for a bandage, but I don't miss the man he became. We spend our lives as mothers building nests for our children. We pluck our own feathers to make sure they're warm. We give up our flight so they can soar. And that's how it should be. But you have to remember one thing. You are still a bird. You still have wings. If you are watching this and you feel like you are being pushed to the edges of the life you built, if you feel like your presence is a chore for the people you love, listen to me. You are not a burden. You are a history. You are a library of stories, a mountain of sacrifices, and a human being who deserves to be seen, not just handled. Don't wait for them to give you a seat at the table. If they won't make room, build your own table. It might be smaller, and the faces around it might be new, but the bread will taste sweeter because it isn't seasoned with guilt. My son still calls sometimes, usually when a bill is due. I don't answer as often as I used to. I'm too busy. I have a bridge club, a garden to tend to, and a life that belongs entirely to me, for the first time in 40 years. I'm not a burden anymore. I'm a woman who is finally, beautifully free.